If you ask a modern racing fan what they think of Team Red Bull, they're probably gonna talk about Formula One. After all, right now they just dominate it. Max Verstappen alone has 44 of the last 66 F1 races won under his belt. He is the most dominant driver, winning the last 3 championships, and there's no reason why anyone would think Red Bull would fail in any way in racing. But then, for many of these newer ones, you might forget that Red Bull was actually in NASCAR at the end of the first decade of the 2000s and into the early 2010s. Because, honestly, their NASCAR tenure was a very different story. This was a team that had a lot of potential, but was in many ways a flash in the pan. So, we're going to look at it today. Why did Red Bull fail in NASCAR? Well, to look back at this, you of course have to look at their tenure, and the performance is the big part of this. They spent 5 years in the NASCAR Cup Series, a relatively short time for a team that many will look back on and remember well. Starting in 2007, this team was a Toyota expansion team. Toyota had just come into the Cup Series, and Red Bull was one of the first teams to jump aboard. And because of this, and especially because of the lack of preparation that Toyota had with the Gen 4 car that was racing in 16 of the 36 points races that year, the team and Toyota in general missed tons of races. There were flashes, though. Brian Vickers, being a young driver who had shown a little bit of upside at Hendrick Motorsports, was clearly their franchise driver. He would run in the top 10 in some races, and it was clear that when Red Bull could make races, they were faster than a lot of the teams they were trying to go against. This would lead into 2008. The 83 team with Brian Vickers became a competitive team with a full-time series COT ride instead of splitting the COT in Gen 4. And the 83 would make every race. Vickers would lead a lot of laps and get top 5 finishes as well. And in some select races, Vickers would even be one of the guys running for the win. Unfortunately, the 84 that was split between AJ Allmendinger and Mike Skinner and whoever else they needed to fill into that car just could not get their act together with this season. But 2009 was a much brighter season, and it was just around the corner. 2009 would be the peak of Red Bull in NASCAR. Starting with Brian Vickers, he would have the best season of his career. He would get a win late in the year at Michigan, granted off of fuel mileage, but he ran up front in this race and in a lot of races that year. And he beat guys like Jeff Gordon and Dale Jr., who were both in superior cars and had better strategy, or at least usually would run better strategy with Hendrick Motorsports. And with this, he would make the 12-driver chase. While finishing last in the chase, it was still a really big statement that Red Bull, a team that 3 years before this did not exist, was now a team that could say they were in the top third of the NASCAR field and had done it consistently enough to beat the likes of, say, Kyle Busch, Matt Kenseth, Clint Bowyer, Jeff Burton, Kevin Harvick, and Dale Earnhardt Jr., to name a few. Their second car would be driven by Scott Speed. Speed would now have the rebranded 82 car in most races, and it was looking like this team was on the up and up, though 2010 was very much a lost year for them. While Speed was driving in more races and was at least a top 30 driver with this car, the 83 had taken a step back before Brian Vickers would miss basically 2/3 of the season due to blood clots. They would have different drivers like Matthias Ekstrom and Casey Mears fill in that car, but it was clear without their franchise driver, they were rudderless. So they made a change, rebranding the 82 car to the 4 car heading into 2011 and being the stopgap for Casey Kane between his time at Evernham, or now Richard Petty Motorsports, and his time at Hendrick Motorsports in 2012. Kane would be in the 4 car for a 1-year deal, and he would take over as the team's best driver, getting them their second ever win at Phoenix in the penultimate race of the 2011 season. And with this as well, Brian Vickers would continue his downward spiral and be most remembered for his meltdown late in the year at Martinsville and Phoenix alike in the same race that Casey Kane won. But After, though, having what seemed to be faster cars than ever consistently, the team shut down. It was honestly kind of weird to think about, and many people, including myself at the time, didn't even realize it was going on until the next year when suddenly a team called BK Racing had all of their equipment and was running the next year. But what I think this all added into and boils down to is the business model as well of NASCAR. When Red Bull jumped into NASCAR in 2007, while starting their downturn in popularity, NASCAR was still at a very high level for viewership, attendance, and the like. Almost every race had over 100,000 people at it, and you add on to that for television, it was between 5 to 15 million watching every week, depending on the race. So there was definitely a market for many teams to jump in, and with an economy that had not yet hit the shitter, well, you had the ability to spend way more money than you probably needed to. And this is probably where Red Bull wanted to get into it. Whereas in 2011, going into 2012, the economy had went down the drain in a lot of ways, had not improved to pre-2008 levels, and on top of that, NASCAR's popularity, while on an uptick that year, was nowhere near where it was when Red Bull was formulating their plan to get into the sport. NASCAR's business model is not built for stability, especially back in the 2000s. When you look at how NASCAR's business model really was, it was built for teams to come and go. No team was really that important to NASCAR at the time because no team needed to be at that point. There were not as many huge popular drivers heading into the 90s as there were, say, in the 2000s and 2010s. And they were using a business model from the 1980s and 1990s that had worked for decades but was failing. Teams like Hendrick Motorsports and Joe Gibbs Racing, who regularly win tons of races as well as win championships, well, even they can't make a profit, and they've admitted such. And when you have that be the case, well, Red Bull was gonna never have that ability. See, the problem Red Bull had in a lot of ways was that they could not only have to look at covering the costs of running a team, but because they were the ones putting their brand on the car, they also had to cover the money that normally sponsorship would add to. And because of that, well, NASCAR's broken system would cost them. Red Bull simply was not profitable. There was no ROI that was really that good for them on the NASCAR side of things because the performance and the money made back from that and the publicity from that was nowhere near the other endeavors that they have done, especially when you compare that to Formula One. To me, Red Bull was probably a decade too early into NASCAR. Had they jumped into NASCAR, say, in 2014 to 2017, I think that they would actually be in a much better place now because generally their performance was improving year over year. They had setbacks, yes, but they always seemed to recover from them. Nowadays, the sport is trying to move forward in many ways. Broadcasting, sponsorship model, promotion, among all other things. They're trying to get to the modern day, and in a lot of ways, you're starting to see it pay off, whether it be with younger people starting to gain more interest in NASCAR, and maybe some of the cost-cutting measures that would have saved Red Bull's bottom line. The charter system also would be something that they would definitely welcome in, as it ensures that quick teams that make it each week and would have no problem of making races every week, well, they could have some compensation if they don't last in NASCAR, and if they do last, it could continue to rise over time. Plus, Red Bull just leads the way in just about everything they're in, and in NASCAR, it was going to take a long time, as it was pretty clear no current manufacturer would have them as their number one team. Even if they left Toyota, they'd be stuck in the same box of being a Tier 2 or Tier 3 team for any manufacturer. And with that, well, Red Bull just was destined to fail in NASCAR. Maybe one day they can come back, but as it is now, there's just not enough changes that have been done that would probably make it profitable or even enhancing and engaging to them to begin. But with that, I want to pass it on to you. Do you wish that Red Bull was still in NASCAR? Let me know down in the comments below. And while you're at it, leave a like on this video, share this video, and subscribe to this channel for more great and fun NASCAR content. Thank you so much to all my channel members for your continued support, and until next time, have a good one.